Hey guys, Fat Man's here. I'm going to tack this onto a front of another video that I'm finally getting to upload. I apologize for not having anything up any sooner than now. Been very busy at work, busy around the house. It is summertime. Got plenty to do around here, and it's been hot, and today it's actually pretty brisk out. But it is what it is. I'm hoping my nephew's coming down. We're going to do a little work on his Mosin. So hopefully I can get some of that film too. I'm gonna get this HiPoint video up on my 40 Smith & Wesson. Check it out. Enjoy. God bless. And thanks for watching. HiPoint JCP 40 Smith & Wesson. Official review. Got a target about 10 yards downrange. Gonna shoot 11 rounds at it. Not bad. Could be better though. It has been better. Shooting my reloads. They're alright. They ain't great. You saw the previous targets. I'll take a quick shot of this one. So that's what we did with 11 rounds. I don't know what I did up here. That was kind of stupid of me. The rest of them are pretty good. No complaints from me. Alright, we'll get back with you when we get back to the shop. Later. Hey YouTube, we made it back to the shop. The HiPoint JCP. Chambered in 40 Smith & Wesson. My targets weren't too bad with it. You saw those on the range portion of the video. I've done a few mods to this one. Essentially, this looked exactly like this. This being my JHP in 45 ACP. The two of them looked identical. In fact, the magazines will switch between them. You can see I did a little polishing on the slide on the JCP. I pretty much bought the JCP so I could have something to tinker with, make it better. Everybody said a lot of bad things about HiPoints. I didn't believe most of them, and still don't, because it hasn't been proven by me. I've got about 500 rounds through the JHP. I've got over 2,000 through the JCP. So the grips on the JHP are pretty smooth, and the JCP was just exactly the same gun for the most part. So the grips are really smooth. I wanted a little bling. I didn't like the protruding point on the front of the trigger guard. Didn't like that at all. What else? I polished this part of the slide down here because everybody seems to do this part because it's easy. This was harder. It took me a while, but I did it and it looks okay. On the other side, I polished the chamber, which this would be your chamber, and I did the barrel. I've done a few other mods on the JCP, but we'll pop it apart here and I'll show you those. So set that one aside. The JCP, like I said, I did a little polishing here. I'll drop the mag, which is empty. Drop the safety, and chamber is empty. The barrel obviously has been polished. The chamber portion here has been polished. But that bottom part of the slide on both sides of the firearm. The grips I stippled and kind of gave them a little pattern to them. I don't know, they work really well. They feel good in my hand. There's a little ridge here that I kind of took down a little bit to make the mag release a little easier for me. The safety started getting sloppy after about the first 1,000 rounds. and I just made a quick fix for that. I could have ordered, the safety kind of uses a little tab on the inside of the grip to put tension on it, and I'll show you some of that too when we get that far. So with all those things, kind of helped the feel from the outside. The gun's pretty accurate. I like it a lot. To take it apart, you need to lock the slide back, and I just use your safety wheel, lock it back. There's a notch there for it. So that's what it's for. I have my two little wooden blocks, and if we can get that so you can see it, there's a pin. Right, there's like a roll pin right in here. We need to pop that out. For that, I took an old hex key and I just rounded it off, made it fit. Works great. Just when you take it apart, you don't really need to get super aggressive with it, because it'll come out. This one's been apart a lot of times, so it really comes apart pretty easy. But it's not loose by any means. Like I said, I've got a couple thousand rounds through this one, and it's working pretty well. So now we drop the slide. Now the slide won't come off. To get it off, I always put my finger behind it because the doll's head is back here. When it pops out of the spot where it sits, which we'll show you in a minute, it can go, it holds the firing pin spring in and it can go flying. So I'm going to slide it forward, lift up on the slide, just a little like that, and come on back with it. And now, pretty much your recoil spring, the guide rod is plastic. It's one of the mods that I did do, and I took it out for some testing. But I did make myself a steel guide rod, and I did that out of a 1/4 inch bolt, and that guide rod's got about 1,000 rounds on it. So it's held up pretty well. I used a grade 8 1/4 inch bolt, 1/4 20 bolt that had a long shoulder on it, and I used the shoulder part of the bolt. So the spring is stock, original. I thought that I was having some issues with my firing pin, and I'm pretty sure I got it narrowed down to just the Remington primers that I used. But since I used 1,000 of them and I loaded all of it for my 40 Smith & Wesson, I'm just going to have to burn through them. But I called them up and I said, I need a new firing pin spring. And what they sent me is everything you see here. The firing pin spring, the guide spring, the firing pin, and the doll's head. The other thing I called about was my Sear, because there's a rod that goes through the Sear. There's a bar that goes through there, and that was bent. And I know why it was bent. I dropped this one day at the range, right off the table, right onto the ground. Guy Smiley was with me when it happened. I don't know if you can even see it. There's some nicks in the finish in the back, but nah, we're not going to care about that because it's pretty superficial, and it didn't hurt the way the gun performs. It still works great, but I think that's what bent that rod. So I haven't cleaned this since the range. It's probably got about 300, 400 rounds through it. So it's time to give it a clean, in my book. HiPoint says 1,000 rounds. I'm not a fan of that. But we got some wear in here along this channel at the bottom of the firing pin channel, and down, actually it's really, you can see some nicks along here where it rides here along this part, which is your hold open, your last round hold open. My feed ramp is polished, and I can't quite get enough schmutz off of there to show you much of it, but it is polished. It's highly polished. Everything is really polished nicely. So there's that. And those parts, when I ordered them and said, hey, I really need these parts, they said, sure, here you go. I'll get them in shipping today. And I had them 2 days later from Ohio. So I was pretty pleased with that. So for the grip, I stippled it. When I stippled them, I just used a soldering iron. There's about 1 million stippling videos out there. You just kind of lift up on the grip, give it a little wiggle, because it has 2 tabs on the bottom of the grip that fit down into the bottom of the frame here. This is all the safety is. There's not much you can do for it. I did, the actual tab was kind of in too far and I couldn't get my thumb on it. There's not much to purchase on there. I did make one, but I didn't like it, so I don't have it in there. I might try again, but I didn't like that one. But I took a file and took off the rough edges just so everything would work a little bit better. There's a little slope. Let's see, I gotta have something better to point with here. There's a little slope in here, right in here, and on the other side, and they ride, I don't know if you can see it here, this tab right here, right there, is what presses against the safety to give it tension. So, when I stippled the grips, they didn't seem to quite fit right, and I think I probably overheated them a little bit, because I should have done it a little at a time. I should have just done bits at a time instead of doing the whole thing in one sitting. Not that one sitting is bad, but I should have, done a little here, done a little here, done a little here, and kind of gone around that way instead of doing it, starting at the top and just working my way all the way down. That was my mistake. The last round hold open, no biggie. It's a spring and it holds it open here. The pin that's holding the last round hold open also holds the barrel onto the frame. So that's part of what gives this gun, I feel, its accuracy at the range. This thing is pretty nice, and my JHP is just as nice. It's very accurate. Over here, take the other grip off. Now I got the Sear and the spring are here, and they fit here. The Sear and the spring fit here. Your dowel's head fits in this hole in your pin. I don't know if you can see my drill bit. The pin goes through there that you knock out to take it apart. Your Sear sits in here. One end rides against the safety, so when you put it on safe, it will lock it, so it can't be fired. There's a magazine release, magazine safety that I've removed from mine. These are modifications that you do at your own risk. HiPoint does not recommend them. Like I said, I got this gun to play with, and I kind of know what I'm doing, so I did my tinkering. I did a lot of research before I did anything. I do not recommend these modifications. This is strictly a range gun for me. The other grip is also stippled. On this grip, there's 2 springs. This one, on mine, it's green. This one is against your magazine release and puts spring tension on that. This one down here goes against the magazine safety. I'm not a big fan of those to begin with. There's also a drop safety in this firearm, so that if it is dropped, it can't go off. And that, I broke a piece on it and had to take it out, but it's going, that one's going back in, because like I said, I dropped this once. You have our trigger just connects to this bar here, and this goes across like that. So when you squeeze your trigger, and it'll probably come apart here, but it just kind of pushes on it, and that drop pulls your Sear down, because your Sear, the rod through your Sear goes through here, pulls your Sear down and releases your firing pin. So that's kind of how it works. This is one of the most simple firearms I've ever looked at. Part of the problem with these is they've got a horrendous trigger pull, and by that I mean it's pretty stiff, and mine is still pretty stiff. But I did a little polishing, and not a ton of it either. Right here, right down around here, because this rides in this piece right in this little crook here. And these are stamped metal parts. So anytime you stamp steel, the backside of the steel is going to get a little ridge on it. And this one, I've taken a jeweler's file and just kind of took it down. I didn't remove really any material, I just kind of took that ridge out of there. I am going to do a little polishing on both sides of this because it rides against this part of your frame. And we want to smooth that up a little bit. I'm going to do the same with the trigger here. And these are things that I'm going to do before I put the gun together again. And also on the trigger parts here, this piece, I did the same. I took all the harsh edges off it and pretty much smoothed everything out. My trigger pull is not what I'd say a great trigger pull, but I like the feel of the trigger on this, and a lot of people don't like it, but I do. It's got a nice, let's see if we can get that, the base here is really nice to put your finger on. It's nice and wide. It's pretty smooth, but it's nice and wide, and I thought about stippling it possibly, put a little stippling in there, but it's pretty easy to grab a hold of. There's not a ton, from right here, there's not a ton of pressure on it. There's enough, you know that it's there. So between that and the Sear spring are probably the two places where you get the most spring tension on it. There isn't much you can do about it. You need both of those parts. The other part of it is the firing pin pushing against the Sear. As the firing pin is locked into the Sear, when you drop the when you pull the trigger, it drops the Sear and the firing pin goes forward. So where that locks up, you can kind of get some trouble too. So I polished my firing pin. My other firing pin had no problems and it was all polished. This one I haven't polished yet. I just kind of stuck it in there to see if this would take care of the problem with those primers. So that's a quick low down and dirty rundown disassembly video on the JHP. I'm going to do a few mods, and that's a little bit on some of the mods that I've done to it. Like I said, whenever you mess with the safeties in your firearm, you do that at your own risk and at your own expense. I do not recommend it. As I said, I did this for my own personal firearm. I will not sell it this way. I have not made any irreversible changes to it. Everything can be put back. I just didn't like the fact that when I shook it like that, it rattled. Kind of like, well, this one isn't even that bad, but you can hear a little. So that was the only thing I didn't like about it. Now it doesn't rattle when it's all together. The guide rod, my steel guide rod, it's a shade short, and I mean just a shade on the short side. It's about 5/1000ths, I think, is all it is. And I'm debating I might put it back in. One of the issues that I had was when we put it back together. Well, I'll show that in the assembly video because you'll see me doing it. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to cut the video. I'm going to do a little polishing on the trigger components and the two parts that I told you about for the trigger. And then I'll be back. We'll get back with you in a little bit here.